let us, without further ado, speak to Mr. Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Terribly sad. Sorry.
Reports that this morning I encountered a severe shortage of common sense. All the places where I normally get it were out.
Well, at least luckily you've checked into the home of common sense, which indeed is alive and kicking here at Talk Radio. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is extraordinary what we're now being told we're going to run out of, but we'll come to that later on. Let's start with the piece that you drew attention to at the weekend after the horrible incidents in Essex with Sir David Amess and the attack on him by this what would appear to be a radical Islamic terrorist. You picked up on the fact that there was a Catholic priest in attendance because Sir David was quite a devout Catholic, and there seemed to be a problem there.
Well, I didn't pick up on it. I mean, with several national newspapers picked up on it on Sunday morning, and I noticed it. I have to say, I'm not myself a Roman Catholic, and I don't. I wouldn't expect to be given the last rites by a priest, but I know people who are Roman Catholics, and I know how incredibly seriously they and their families often take this. And when I saw that this had happened, I was astonished by it, because I still have this idea in my head, even though everything I know tells me it's wrong, that the police are a relatively conservative, common sense organisation. And I posted a tweet saying that whatever else this event showed that Britain could certainly no longer be called a Christian country. I think 50 years ago, if a priest had appeared at a scene where a known Roman Catholic was dying, the police would have let him through without a second's thought. It would have been a normal thing to do, but all that's gone now.
Well, I suppose you could argue
it doesn't apply to this sort of thing. This isn't because of hostility exactly. I mean, no doubt there are people in the police as everywhere else who are hostile to religious faith of one kind or another, but in general, the police are just ignorant of it and indifferent to it, as so much of our society is. Simply don't know. And I've been engaged in this terrible Twitter brawls for the past 12 hours or so with people who simply can't understand that this might matter to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what disturbs me. I just happen to know that anybody who's read or indeed watched the amazing television adaptation of Evelyn Waugh's great novel, Brideshead Revisited, will know the final scenes are all about this very issue of how important it is to the family of a dying man that he receives the last rites. And it just is an important thing. And I'm just surprised by how lightly people take it and have yourself a priest, not an emergency service. And it might in some way corrupt the crime scene. If you go, all kinds of people are present at crime scenes when people are dying. And nobody says you can't and quite rightly, nobody says you can't let a doctor or a paramedic in because they might corrupt the crime scene, because what they're doing is good. I happen to think that if somebody is dying and their faith makes them believe they should have a priest at the end, then that person is an emergency service and should be allowed in. I'm just astonished at the anger which people have expressed at this suggestion.
Yes, but I think, more than likely, this is, as you say, not because of anything other than perhaps either indifference or the ludicrous health and safety nonsense, where somebody nevertheless is actually dying, and the health and safety rules, so you mustn't let anybody else near them in case they might be also wishing to do them harm. Even though they may look like a priest, they may not be a priest. But more important, I think, is what you say, that people say all the time now, what does it matter? I saw Alistair Campbell tweeting at the weekend, what's the big deal about wearing a mask on the underground? I see people saying things like that all the time. Well, the big deal is that some people don't wish to do it and therefore will not do it. And it's as simple as that. And it's their choice.
Well, it's the thing. If I have to say that there have been countries in which the people would be more or less compelled to have the attentions of priests at the end when they didn't believe. And I would very much support them in resisting that. I don't, because I can imagine being an unbeliever who did not want a priest at the end, just as readily as I can imagine being a Roman Catholic believer who did.
Yeah.
It's just the absence of sympathy for other people holding different views from your own, and the way in which the expression of and I get this all the time, the expression of a dissenting view from any conventional wisdom is not just treated as the expression of a dissenting view, but is treated as a hostile act, which must itself be greeted with hostility and rage and anger, and the implicit attitude in this that I shouldn't be allowed so much as to say it. which is why I constantly fear for what remains of our freedom of speech and thought in this country, which is under relentless attack on the small scale and on the large scale, everywhere, in places of work, in the media, everywhere, that indeed in the courts and in the police. The whole idea that people should be able to have a divergence of dissenting opinions from conventional wisdom is now under question. And we are moving with extraordinary rapidity towards a society in which only one point of view will be permitted.
Yeah, and that was your other main piece in the column this Sunday about how we seem to have become so sort of cold, if you like, and sort of made to kneel by society and by authority, that you fear that we are now kind of creating a rod for our own backs, if you like, that they will introduce these various different measures at will whenever they want to.
I think the fascinating thing about the parliamentary report last week on the COVID crisis was that it presumed, without, as far as I can see, any serious attempt to study the global evidence on it, it simply presumed that shutting down society was a good response. And this presumption was immediately accepted, again, in our culture and in the media as a normal thing to say without examination. And we have surrendered by accepting this. And I do grasp that people have accepted that this is not just the majority opinion, but the opinion which almost everybody holds, apart from a very few dissenters such as me. By accepting this, we have opened ourselves to another set of shutdowns on some other pretext and given to the state and the police and the government enormous powers which they didn't previously possess over us because we have failed to defend the freedoms we had before. And that's what happens. If you have a freedom and you don't defend it, you lose it. And we have now lost it. And that, the fact that that report said what I think I said many times on this program, when the reports start to come in, they will say we did not lock down soon enough or hard enough, and everybody will accept it. And this is already beginning to happen. And that's the way it goes. Why we are so placid and willing to have this stuff done to us when we're supposed to be the great nation of the tradition of freedom and the Bill of Rights and Magna Carta, I'm not sure. But there it is. That's what we are. So if we don't want to be free, I absolutely promise you we won't be.
No. And did it just happen, though, do you think, when the first lockdown came about? Because I know you and I have spoken about this many times, and when we first started this conversation, you and I differed on why it happened. Because back then I was under the impression that it was only going to go on for a few weeks, and that you would never really know whether it safeguarded the NHS or not. And I still think that, in a way, that you still cannot, you can't really prove it one way or the other.
Well,
unfortunately.
Try using the NHS at the moment.
Well, yeah.
Safeguarded.
No, listen. I'm perfectly willing to admit that you were far righter than I was. While I may say still keep a smidgen of possible rightness, because I thought if it was just a little short reason to stop. I saw a piece, I don't know if you saw it the weekend in the Sunday Times, about the guy responsible for the lockdown, who it turns out is some kind of technical geek, a physics major, who studied data and who was wheeled into the room by Dominic Cummings, who ran an artificial intelligence company, and he was the one who convinced Boris Johnson, apparently, to lock down. Matthew Syed wrote the piece in the Sunday Times. An extraordinary piece. They're calling this guy a genius, when in fact he had no reason other than the data that he was showing about what might happen to make it happen.
Yeah, let's probably not go through this again, because try as anyone might, I think this is now what the world has accepted, and we've now moved into an era of less freedom and more government power than we ever saw before, and one can only resist it from time to time. Could I, by the way, make a small comment on the murder of Sir David Amess? That I think a lot of people are jumping to a lot of conclusions at the moment. We know, it seems to me, almost nothing about it, except that it took place. And I would urge huge caution in deciding what the manner of the event is. There's been no trial. The last time I looked, there hadn't even been a charge. So again, we mustn't presume anything at all. And I would just urge a great deal of caution on everybody before leaping to conclusions about what it means and what it's all about, because I just don't think we have adequate information to do that.
No, I don't think so. But I guess my question is, were we already sort of softened up for it, if you like, so that when the time came last March 2020, people were more willing than they perhaps would have been otherwise?
I think that societies do tend to be conformists. But the great thing about the Britain that I grew up in was that it had a substantial number of people, a critical mass of people, who were prepared to say, no, I don't agree with that. and these were people in every place. And I wrote an article, we discussed it last week, about my time as a Labour correspondent. Well, the trade unions, for instance, were full of people who'd become important by standing up for themselves on behalf of others, not doing what they were told, not agreeing with everything everybody had told them. There was a spirit of standing up to authority in the trade unions. There was a spirit of standing up to authority in Parliament. MPs genuinely opposed the government, and there were fantastic figures, such as the late Tam Diel MP, who made a profession of not believing what the government told him. And quite rightly, I don't think he has an equivalent now. And there was a lot more dissent in the press. And the other thing was our education system still turned out people who understood the necessity to obtain facts before reaching opinions. And that's all gone now. People are taught opinions rather than taught the knowledge which enables them to form them. As I repeatedly say, people are taught not how to think, but what to think.
Yeah.
And many, many years of that had its effect when it came to the shutdown over COVID. It was amazing how much more passive and willing to accept being told what to do our society was. Now, none of the safety valves worked. Neither the media nor the courts nor Parliament nor the opposition actually tried to establish whether this was the right thing to do. And so there we are. But what do we do about it? Can we reconstruct these things? Personally, I think not, but some people might think it's worth a try. But at the very least, can we try and make sure it doesn't get any worse?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think the trouble is now we've reached a point where it's not so much where you're taught what to think, but you're taught what not to think and which opinions not to have.
That also is true, yes. People are frightened out of thinking certain things.
Yeah. I mean, they totally are, and they're very frightened of speaking out. I mean, the whole debates that rage around academia now are so ridiculous as to be kind of almost laughable, aren't they?
Well, you would, but this is the thing. I mean, what George Orwell said about the goose step, the countries in which the army did the goose step were countries in which it was dangerous to laugh at things which were patently ridiculous.
Yeah.
The goose step is ridiculous, but when in Soviet Russia or in Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy, when the troops went by doing their high kicks, people did not laugh. It was dangerous to laugh, even though it was ridiculous. And we reached a position, and what's happening in our universities at the moment is beyond belief.
Yeah, but this is this is one of the strange.
Every time it's laughed at, those who laugh at it get into trouble, and it continues and intensifies.
Yeah, but this is why, again, every kind of argument that happens, and in the wake of what happened on Friday and the murder of an MP, suddenly we're having conversations about whether we should be kinder to one another and whether we should stop being mean on Twitter, as if somehow that was the cause of an MP being murdered by a terrorist, which of course it wasn't.
If the alleged killer was a terrorist, again, but I mean, we don't know that. But maybe this is the reason. Maybe there is an awful lot of hatred about. But part of the point of Parliament, of course, is that it provides a safety valve for the strong passions which major contentious issues bring about in a society. People like to see in Parliament the government under pressure, the opposition being tough. They don't mind the shouting or the heckling at Prime Minister's Question Time, because they think, well, at least in this country, we know that our opinions are being properly represented. I don't think they are anymore anything like as well as they used to be, but that's the point of Parliament. So the idea which is being propagated by some people at the moment that MPs should be hidden away and should cease to have contact with the public seems to me to be a grave mistake. And obviously, we should take all reasonable precautions to prevent them from being killed in such horrible circumstances, but they mustn't be allowed to go into hiding. We would regret that forever if that was allowed to happen.
Yes, I think the idea of trying to, somehow protect MPs around the clock with some ludicrous amount of money and ludicrous amount of people, which is completely and utterly impracticable anyway, isn't really the way forward. But by the same token, I think it's also ridiculous to try and kind of assimilate the two things, as though people being horrible to you on Twitter somehow creates a terribly bad atmosphere where people start running around murdering one another.
Well, no, but I think there is a viciousness in our public debate at the moment, which is dangerous. I don't think that's entirely wrong to point out that this happens. See, if you are ever the target, as I have been of this sliming on Twitter, I've learned to expect it. It doesn't. I can't allow myself to be scared by it, but I won't pretend that it's pleasant. And I think sometimes it takes on a form which is extraordinarily vicious and has and contains, in some cases, the implication of violence.
Yeah.
I've had people speculating on Twitter about kicking me off my bicycle when riding along the road. I just think that people, especially when they're anonymous, so many of the worst offenders on social media, especially when they're anonymous, they do go much too far. So I don't, whether this is in any way connected with the tragedy of Sir David Amess, I would not like to say, but I don't think it's untrue to say that there is a very low and nasty mood on social media at the moment. One has to keep reminding oneself that this person saying these things is probably somebody sitting in his mother's basement, quite converting sugary drinks into human lard, and that shouldn't necessarily be taken too seriously. But it doesn't feel like that when you're on the receiving end of it. And you aren't some leathery old crocodile from Fleet Street.
No, but also there is the other side of it, which is the non-anonymous side, where you've got these kind of activists who have become very adept at contacting all the right people. Should they wish to try and get you to lose your job, they're very good at contacting the people in your organisation who might be, a little bit fragile about it, or people in the advertising world, or people who, might be supportive of you financially. They're getting very good at sort of cornering you off and singling you out and making sure that they tell all the people that need to know what a terrible, horrible person you are, in the hopes that you'll be cancelled.
Well, this is I'm afraid, is the world in which we live. And there it is again. It's all the same thing, tending in this awful direction, a closed rather than an open society, in which it becomes a personal failing to dissent, and you're not just wrong, but you're bad. And I can't see a good end to it. And,
no,
but it needs. The only thing I can do is draw attention to it, in the hope that maybe somebody will find a way of starting a long march back through the institutions to try and undo this and get us back to a position where we tolerate and treat with civilization our opponents, rather than viewing them as enemies to be hated and despised.
Yes.
And I do try to be civil to people who attack me, and there is a limit. I will sometimes, after it's clear that somebody is incapable of civilized discourse, I will sometimes hit back because I think it's just and necessary. But if I possibly can stay civil, I do, and I urge other people to do the same thing.
Yes. And do you think that also the politicians now bear some blame for some of this, because they have become slightly deranged about one another's opponents as well?
Well, some of them have, but the main blame they bear is that they've pretty much decided that a huge number of issues are closed, and that the things which divide this country. And it's an interesting thing. You look up Sir David Amess. He was a man of very conservative social and moral views. And although he's now rightly being, as people who died are rightly being treated with a great deal of courtesy and death, a lot of the people who are treating him with courtesy and death would not have agreed with what he said about these things.
No.
And those opinions on, say, abortion or capital punishment were marginal in the parliament in which he sat, although they might well have been held by a large number of his constituents. I don't think Parliament, either of the major parties in Parliament, anymore make a very good job of representing the real spectrum of opinion. They've accepted a very narrow, crudely defined as politically correct view of all kinds of things, which simply isn't believed in by an awful lot of people. And so, as a result, a lot of political debate has got outside Parliament and outside conventional politics, and one of the places it emerges is in these furious and bilious and personally vicious attacks on social media. So if Parliament were more representative of the true divisions in the country, I think it would draw a lot of the poison out of the internet.